Welcome to the Engineering Influence podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies. Today, we are focusing in on the future of transportation, especially mass transit. And we're talking to an expert in that field. Very pleased to be joined today by Stuart Lerner. He is the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for Stantec North America. Stu has more than 30 years of experience in the transportation infrastructure and transit-oriented world, as well as experience in heavy civil infrastructure work. Before joining Stantec in 2007, Stu had progressed through several leadership roles, including serving as a transit and rail leader, transportation business line leader, and business operating unit leader for infrastructure. Stu is someone who has been very, very involved in just multimodal transportation, and he's a perfect expert to be to join us today to talk about this issue. Stu, thank you very much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
So, Stuart, let's start off, I guess, with your story here. I mean, you've been very ingrained in mass transit, in civil infrastructure. Why is the issue of mass transit and kind of the future of transportation very important to you?
Well, Jeff, as you mentioned, I've been involved with mass transit for literally decades now, and not only that, but I've also been commuting to Midtown Manhattan for literally the same period of time. It kind of goes back to the early 90s when I was starting a family. And, the long story short is simply that I was trying to evaluate where to live, and commuting was certainly one of the largest factors as to where to live. And I decided that I would try to live in a location that was only less than 25 miles from New York City. And the train ride would be something more manageable, let's say less than 40 minutes. And I found that location. And it was all great, except for the fact that, as all mass transit commuters especially know, that there's more to the commute than the train ride. There's the getting to the station, there's the parking at the station, there's the waiting for the train. And then, of course, there's getting from the station in New York City to your final work location. And all that added up to more than 75 minutes. A good day was when I caught the rocket train. The rocket train took me from Midtown Manhattan to my suburban location, express, and maybe I could get in close to an hour in door-to-door commute. The commuter war stories were legendary. We used to kind of regale them at a various cocktail hour or two. Who could outdo who got stuck on the bridge, who got stuck in the station, who got stuck in the tunnel. We tried to outdo each other, and there was a bit of folklore. But the point being is that these war stories were legendary and similar to the way the horse and buggy. Hopefully they will go away as we get into the future.
Yeah, I know we all have our stories, and it is kind of interesting how it was always the fight of who had the worst. I mean, I'd have my stories when I lived in New York City, and I'd commute from Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, all the way into Midtown Manhattan. And now in Virginia, of course, the Washington, D.C. Beltway is famous in its own right for terrible commutes and just before the express lanes came in, it was a question of whose commute was going to be under an hour just to go 10 miles. So, things like this are hopefully, going to be going away as we invest in more innovative transportation systems. How, in your mind, how can those stories kind of dissipate? How can we move beyond the bumper to bumper, traffic and just everybody kind of getting on the roads and just not looking at other opportunities for transportation or improving the likelihood for somebody to choose mass transit over their car?
Well, transportation, as you said, has evolved a lot. It's evolved a lot, especially in the last 100 years or so. But the issues associated with the pandemic and climate change are magnifying those changes to what's going to happen with transportation, especially in urban centers, which have really been developed because of the mass transit capabilities. There's going to need to be changes to the economics of commuting and the environmental impacts associated with commuting, the safety associated with commuting. The overall quality of life has got to improve with commuting. In the New York City region, the governor of New York proposed what they call congestion pricing. Congestion pricing, which exists in places like Stockholm and London and Singapore, was going to take some mass transit. Well, it's going to take some toll revenues generated by that congestion pricing and going to fund the mass transit. The MTA website says that roughly 80% of the toll revenues are going to be generated by tolls was going to be funding mass transit improvements. And specifically, $1.5 billion was going to go into the commuter railroads of Long Island Railroad and Metro North each. These are suburbs of New York City from the east and from the north of Midtown Manhattan. The governor paused those congestion pricing for a variety of factors because of the impacts, and maybe more study needs to be happening. But the fact of the matter is the studies have been going on for 5 years. Something we really need to figure out as we go forward.
What do you think? How was that received in New York? Because you're right. I mean, it's not as though this is an absolutely new idea. It's maybe it's new to the United States, but Europe certainly has been leading the charge on congestion pricing. London, I think, was one of the first cities to put it into effect. And it's not as though it's a revolutionary concept outside of the U.S. How was it accepted in New York when it was first proposed by the governor?
It's very controversial, and quite frankly, there's not widespread acceptance, although there is definitely a need for funding mass transit. The question is, how do we do that? One would think that I'd be a personal advocate of congestion pricing, and I am an advocate for congestion pricing, but not for all of the way the plan was. And I do think it needs some modifications. There are questions with respect to how all the money was going to be spent. Cities such as New York City have become very prominent in the world as a result of this mass transit system. But ridership, as I said, is down due to the pandemic. And likely while the ridership is coming back to normal levels within the core of Manhattan, or within the core of the 5 boroughs, I should say, it's not necessarily coming back the way it was in the suburbs. Commuter rail itself is down. The off-peak ridership has increased within the 5 boroughs. But in suburbia, people are only coming into the office 3 or 4 days a week. And that, as a result, is driving the ridership down. This is creating a problem, a conundrum for the various mass transit agencies. They used to subsidize roughly 50% of the mass transit ridership. Now that subsidy has to get even higher because of the reduced ridership. This is creating a larger problem, creating a bit of a downward spiral in the overall mass transit operations. It's not financially sustainable.
Yeah. So there has to be an alternative, because you're right. I mean, it's endemic in the DC area, of course. I mean, the largest population of workers is federal government, and they're, really reacting negatively to being forced back into the office post-COVID. I mean, everybody wants to work remotely. A lot of companies are half week, 3 days a week. The city is still largely empty. Traffic is nothing compared to what it used to be. But at the same time, those, fewer people, less fare box income. How is the pandemic going to drive these changes in mass transit? How do you see an exit path from this issue of you can't subsidize these lines, without the passenger ridership to actually keep them going on? It's not a sustainable thing.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Commuter rail goes back to literally 100 years or more, back to the mid-1800s, quite frankly, one could argue. Back then, when they started these systems, it was highly efficient. You could move hundreds of people with a relatively small amount of manpower and a small amount of energy. Steel wheels on steel rails is a particularly efficient way, an energy-efficient way of moving high volumes of people. But things have changed, as you said, Jeff. The work schedules are much more variable, and it's creating this predicament for the various rail agencies, such as VRE down by you, or up here in Manhattan, or up in Boston, etc. The ridership is not likely to recover to the pre-pandemic levels, especially on the commuter rail lines, for the foreseeable future. It's going to create this downward spiral. The rail cars are generally used less than 10% of the time. Think of all the deadhead trains, or the trains that operate at large headways, more than 30 minutes. All of this creates a large amount of inefficiency on those rail corridors. The past solution to solving this economic problem of inefficiency was really to get external funding, such as the congestion pricing. But the cost of capital improvements for these mass transit improvements has become more exorbitant than ever before. And quite frankly, it's going to take decades for a lot of these improvements to pay for themselves. The cost-benefit ratios just are not there. And that's independent of some of the other things that occur on rail systems. Other inefficiencies are created by climate change. There was lots of disruptions throughout the Northeast due to a variety of factors this summer, whether it was flooding, whether it was heat, whether it was isolated events on the rail lines and due to passenger issues, etc. All of this creates a tremendous amount of inefficiency that needs to be improved. and addressed by the rail agencies.
Is the future more of a hybrid approach, multimodal, bus rapid transit to light rail to something rideshare or something at the end of the station terminus? Is it a lot of different modes coming together? Maybe some that are publicly financed, some that might be maybe like Brightline in Florida, which are privately financed, or a hybrid. It doesn't seem like the one size fits all publicly financed transit system is really the path of the future.
I couldn't agree more. The one size fits all, which was applicable for the last 100 years or so, that's got to change. We need to embrace new technology. The Roman chariot has gone away. Electronic tolling has made the need for toll plazas need to go away. In fact, all that congestion at toll plazas that used to exist 10, 20 years ago has now gone away. The need for even doing a map preparation on a trip that you've never taken before has gone away. You now just use your smartphone, type in the final destination, and let the phone do the work for you. The transporting public has adapted new technology, and so do the agencies. They need to jump on board. Yeah. There are autonomous systems in places, mass transit systems such as in Honolulu or in Vancouver. There's lots of investigation of bus rapid transit systems, as you said, Jeff. Mm-hmm. All of that needs to be considered. I would advocate that we should be considering autonomously operated rubber tire tram systems on a variety of dedicated corridors. These trams could have the flexibility to go off corridor in the event of an emergency or a tree falling on a catenary wire, any one of those types of things. Also, this automated rubber tire system would provide for some flexibility as far as operations. It could scale up and scale down based on ridership demand, not just so much what Uber and Lyft do, and also require less storage of vehicles. All of this is beneficial to the transit agencies.
And that technology isn't new. That's been around for a while, right? The fact that you could actually take something that's on a rail, but at the same time, it can exit the rail if necessary. And you have that ability to work on both ways, road and then also on, straight line. Are there any other cities in the world that really maximize that or use that to good use?
I can't say I know of any particular systems that are going off fixed rail onto rubber tire systems, but there are definitely lots of rubber tire systems. And as I spoke of, there is autonomous systems on fixed rail. So we need to kind of consolidate those two technologies into a singular technology. And I'd be an advocate for not spending as much money on the fixed rail systems that the commuters or the commuter rail agencies are doing, and doing a more robust cost-benefit analysis with respect to the overall operation of a system. There's talk of things like flying taxis. The laws of physics will not really make that energy efficient anytime soon. So I think we just really need to make sure that the rail agencies are adopting new technology to provide for flexible and reliable advancements in transportation. They need to be able to adapt to the world of the post-pandemic world where there's less ridership. And they also need to adapt to the needs of climate change as well.
Yeah, there will be flying taxis, but not for everyone, right? It's either going to be for people who are, can afford it or need to go short distances, but nobody's going to be trying to make a long commute on a flying taxi. It'll be interesting to see how that develops, but it seems like there are enough, there's proof and concept. I mean, the technology there for autonomous vehicles, especially when you're looking at the freight industry and the way that they have started to do autonomous convoying of tractor trailers, Tesla for whatever you think of Tesla. I mean, their truck that they're designing, they've put through a lot of rigorous testing over actual miles of autonomous and electric, really improving their electric system. So the technology is there. The question is the political will to actually leverage it and move it forward. So, Stuart, what are you hearing from your clients when you're looking at doing something like an institutional project that you just wrapped up, one of the EEA winning projects on Long Island Railroad, and expanding the number of rail lines into Manhattan for eastbound traffic, or something that's a little bit more, compact or not a large, civil infrastructure project. What are your clients saying about how they want to get people to their locations? And are they also thinking broader than just, hey, let's make sure that we incorporate a metro stop here or something like that?
Yeah, there are certainly some clients that are saying that the traditional way of expanding a transit system, a mass transit system, specifically a commuter rail system, needs to be reinvestigated. As I said, they're looking into bus rapid transit as an example, as an alternative. Some are looking into autonomous transit operations. Others are still very much stuck on the fixed rail systems, how to expand that, or at least how to make them operate more efficiently. So it's a mixed bag depending on which client and what their funding streams are.
Got it. It's very, I mean, it's a fascinating topic. It's something that I know that, every single time, well, we'll see what happens because IIJA, of course, is going to be expiring. You're going to have the opportunity for another service bill. You're going to have another opportunity for a rail bill, and all these things kind of fill in. It would be nice to see some of these technologies make it outside of a research title and actually start getting funded and really putting some public investment behind it. Any final thoughts as we wrap up here? I mean, it seems like it's clear. I mean, the one thing that is clear in the conversation, the status quo cannot stand. There needs to be a change, and we need to embrace that change. But any other thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I would just double down on what you just said. We need to embrace change, and it has to come through technology. I use the electronic tolling example as how change in transportation has really had a dramatic impact by the use of new technology. That same logic needs to be utilized by the mass transit agencies so that we can have more flexible and reliable systems as we go forward.
Fantastic. Well, Stuart Lerner, again, he is the Chief Operating Officer and Executive Vice President at Stantec North America. Very involved over decades in the issues of mass transit and civil infrastructure. I really appreciate you joining us today for this conversation. It's going to be the first, not the last, and on a very, very interesting topic. So, Stu, thank you very much again.
Thank you, Jeff.
And again, this has been Engineering Influence, a podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies, and we'll see you next time.